Irving and I are honored to introduce you to our presenter today. Rodney Williams is a Senior President of Strategic Partnerships and Industry Solutions Delivery Sales, and also served as COO of Microsoft Brazil. Rodney believes in leading from the front to create an environment that facilitates respectful and effective collaboration between people of all races, genders, and backgrounds, while allowing every person to grow to their full potential and truly leveraging the power of a diverse team. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Rodney Williams, a proud father of two, who will be sharing his presentation entitled People Leadership. The floor is all yours, Rodney.
Thanks, Shervin. You give me more credit than I deserve, brother. Listen, everyone, I'm so happy to be with you here today. I've been at Microsoft for 22 years with roles that have spanned technical architecture, sales and delivery management, program management, as well as business development. In my current role, I run a global sales organization for our technology consulting business. And running a global team actually presents some unique challenges for me and for anyone. And I often ponder and think through, over the course of my career, what are the things that I've learned that have prepared me to be effective in my role today or in future roles. And the primary focus is around how you lead people, how you lead from the front at times, how you lead from the back at other times. I'll be reminiscing about how my own leadership journey and then discussing what we can be as effective leaders to inspire and engage our teams, no matter our position, no matter our level within the organizations that we provide capabilities for. You may be thinking, I'm an individual contributor. What does this crazy Microsoft guy saying here that applies to me? Or you might be saying, I'm a C-level executive. No matter if you manage a 10,000 person organization or you're leading from your first job right out of college, all of you have the capabilities to influence and inspire others. It is never too early to develop some leadership capabilities, and it's never too early to think about your leadership journey, whether you are at the end of your career or at the start of your career. The first step that I've learned the hard way is I had to check my ego at the door. Sometimes, your ego is the first place and the recipe for disaster. Too much ego, you can not listen and inspire others. Not enough egos, you can appear timid, right? And so really trying to check that at the door, and then how you can work with others to become better, or how you can bring the best out of others, and they in turn will bring the best out of you. As we transition, let me talk about some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. And so what you're seeing here in this chart is kind of my timeline as I've worked for Microsoft. I worked for several companies prior to Microsoft, but this is kind of the journey around peopleship that I learned working here. And so, I started out as a technical architect, delivering capabilities. My experience prior to Microsoft was extensive in financial services. I used to build and design trading floors and trading systems from that. And so coming into Microsoft, I left a role where I was a people leader. I was a chief architect in the prior company that I worked for. And I came to Microsoft to get deeper in the technology, because, when you're leading people, sometimes you have to, take a back seat on the technical. So I came back to be a technical leader. And so I came to Microsoft because it was Microsoft. And with NT4, I was like, okay, Microsoft is really ready to start doing some amazing things in the market. And so I came, and the thing I learned in that first role for me was around customer and people connection. And so I started the company as a consultant. They shipped me up to Minnesota, where I worked with a company, two companies that merged around their technology. And the thing I learned about sitting being with that customer every day is really putting myself in their shoes and listening to the problems that they had, and then providing solutions. I used to say I never want to be a sales guy, because I didn't necessarily want to sell something that I didn't believe in. The thing I learned here was how to not necessarily be a sales guy, not focus on salesy type things, but to listen and provide solutions that made the best sense for those customers. And I quickly learned how to become a trusted advisor to people that I just met for the first time. Then I graduated and I moved into, enterprise practice management. That's where I had a portfolio of business, and I ran as a part of US Financial Services in Boston. In that learning, it was really about learning about how to lead a complex group as a manager of managers. So I learned how that, you have to create intent, you have to create clarity, and then you have to create listening mechanisms so that, not only your direct reports are conveying the messages that you want, are getting the messages from you, but it needs to filter through others. And so creating clarity, creating the ability for people to understand directionally what you want, not being in a position to micromanage them, and then getting out of their way and allowing them to do that. I learned that as an enterprise practice manager. And then I pivoted into a sales job, and they said, "Hey, Rodney, you're pretty good with this, this stuff you're doing. We want you to go sell." And I went kicking and screaming. And the reason I went kicking and screaming is because I wanted to remain genuine. But I learned here is that your genuine self, selling and believing in the things you believe in and conveying that, is key to not only create clarity for folks, but also put them in a position to actually teach me. And so I learned how to business recovery. And so I made my career at Microsoft, the various promotions, because I made a name for myself. Was if there was a struggling business, they would ship me there, and then I would go put the steps in place to, put that business on the right path. And so I did a lot of work around evaluating the skill versus the will of people. I did a lot of work around creating inspiration for people. And the most important piece of that is then people needed to go execute a program and execute a plan associated with what the key metrics the company had for us. And so I learned that in that job. Then they threw a curveball at me. And so I'm born and raised in Chicago. Most of my time has been in the United States. And then they gave me a challenge. They said, "We want you to go to Brazil because we have a struggling business there. And it's a completely different culture." And in that culture of Brazil, I learned a few key things around community and bringing people and looking at the differences in culture, the differences in communication style. And what I learned there was, in order to get the most out of the people, you have to touch their heart. And if you touch their heart, they will bend over backwards to do the things that are necessary. But the only way you are able to do that is to connect with them and understand more about them, and then provide solutions, provide coaching, provide training for them that they will in turn appreciate. And so I learned how to be a compassionate leader in Brazil. And with that compassion, I learned how to communicate differently. I didn't change who I was. I'm still a very type A, in your face type person, but I needed to learn how to soften that a bit and connect with people on a personal level in order to get them to believe. Because one of the things I learned was, culturally, I learned that people there do not like to tell you no. And so no was not in the vocabulary. So if you say something, or you meet with a customer and you talk to them about something, they may not be behind what they want. And so what ended up happening to me is I had to read the complete person, not only what they were saying, but I had to, and I learned more about during this period around, I have two of these, and one of these. And I learned that, listening and looking at body language was more provided more opportunities for me to communicate more effectively, to understand what people are looking for, and then be able to provide coaching and leadership to go try to drive that. And I also learned there are times when me as the leader, I may need to take a back seat and let a subordinate lead, and provide avenues and vehicles to help them grow. And so I pride myself in the people that I work with in my organizations. I pride myself in the promotion of them. I pride myself in giving them the opportunity to excel, and not always having the answer, but being able to provide some guidance and then step back and then let them do their job. And they will get more fulfillment out of that. And then as a result of that work, they asked me to stay and be the number 2 in Brazil. And so as the chief operating officer for that subsidiary, I learned how to run a business at scale. I learned how to run a complex multi-segment, $billion plus business, and look at the complexities of how we engage with governments, how we work with, customers, how we engage with our partners in the ecosystem. And so I learned that in probably one of the best places to learn that. It's a very complex system in Brazil. And so I learned how to operate in an emerging market, and those capabilities are something that I chalk up today, and they help me in my worldwide job today. And then now as a vice president of sales, from 2017 to the present, basically it's a global business, it's a global scale. I do a lot, COVID taught me some things here because I used to travel about 70% of the time. And then with COVID, I learned how to lead teams and lead an organization, with this being the only mechanism of how you communicate with them. You're not in the place with them. So a lot of meetings at 3 a.m, 2 a.m, a lot of early mornings and a lot of late nights. And so, I learned what I'm learning and still learning in this role is continuing that scale, continue to look, learn, and listen, to be in a position to go try to provide the help and the guidance that I think people need. I'll pause a second just to see if we have any questions that came in, Shervin.
No questions so far, but I'm sure they're
okay.
coming.
Great. And so, in my career at Microsoft, there have been numerous challenges, and there have been numerous reorgs. There have been, numerous directional changes for the company. And I personally have played a part at different levels of scale during that. And so, the question that really comes up that we have to answer and do an effective job of answering is, how to become a transformational leader. I don't necessarily have the answers to that today. What I can provide you is the recipe that I use to go do that. And I think I've gotten some success from it, but I'm still ever learning, right? And so there's still things that I'm failing. And so when I have a failure point, when I have a difficult situation, those are the best learnings for me. Over my career, it's not the times when things were rocking and we were doing very well. It was those tough times when I was getting my butt kicked, or I was, pushed outside of my comfort zone just because of an economic situation or things like that. Like, I go back to my experience in Brazil where they had a Lava Jato going on while I was the COO there. And so there was a lot of corruption in the market, and the market tanked. And so that was the best learning for me. And I saw a lot of different things during that, during that time. And so it's not when it's easy, it's when it's hard do we have our best learning. And transformational leaders need to run to that. They need to run to that. Then they need to bring those tools that we talk about. And so I'm going to go through a few key points of what I mean by those tools. it starts with trust, both, practical trust and emotional trust. The people who you are leading need to trust for you to have that you're predictable, that you're steeped in knowledge, and then you need to provide emotional support for folks who are having a tough time. And so when I think about that, it's really a combination of IQ and EQ, and how you bring those together to try to help and lead people, and creating trust and clarity for me are synonymous. And so it starts with there. Then the second piece of that is, career development, and focusing on growth. Any business needs to be a business that is one that works and drives towards growth. And so the only way that you can create that is not for the moment in time that you are. And so when you're talking about how you lead people, you have to also lead people towards the future. And so here's your current state. You have to work and develop people and do career development as a focus that will actually move as the requirements for your organization moves. And so career development is a key point. Every organization that I have and that I lead, I require career development plans for all employees, and I review them. And then if I have a skip level with someone further down in the organization, skip level one-on-one or meeting with them, that's what I lead with. I start with that career plan, and I focus on trying to understand what those people are trying to achieve from a career perspective, and then I challenge them, and so career development towards growth is the second piece of that. The third recipe, which I think instills trust, is to listen. And so ask open-ended questions. One of the things that we do here at Microsoft is that coaching, there's a lot of training associated with how you coach people and coaching. And so how you listen, how you ask questions, and then listen to the feedback, and then play it back for people to see if they're moving their path down. So don't necessarily give them the answers, but listen to what they have to say, and then provide recommendations or suggestions, and then get out of their way and let them go solve it. Because, if we recruit the best talent, and all companies believe that they're going to go out and recruit the best talent, we need to enable them to go develop and grow as we grow. Okay. The fourth one for me is around how we overcome unconscious bias. And what I mean by that is that, so this is the neuroscience and so, our minds create shortcuts in how we process a lot of data. And sometimes those shortcuts can lead us to points of bias when there shouldn't be. And so I have to overcome unconscious bias. Like, I have a certain communication style that I have. And so one of the unconscious biases that I had was that people who had a different communication style for me, early on in my career, I made some mistakes in judging. I made some mistakes in not getting the most out of those folks. I'll tell you a story. There was a guy that I used to be on one of my teams, and he communicated very differently from me. He came from a very different background than me. I'm from the South Side of Chicago. He came from a different background. And one of the key learnings that I had was this guy was brilliant. He just communicated differently than I did. And I failed as a leader because I did not give that employee at the time the opportunity to excel and provide the thought leadership and based on how he communicates. And so for me, I said, I'll never make that mistake again. And the way I found that out about my failure is that he left and he went to another organization. And then he came back and we were working, our teams were working on a project, and I got to spend more time with him. And so the thing you got to do is, when you overcome unconscious bias, you also have to provide options on how to get them to communicate, how to get them to contribute. And so now one of the key leadership things that I do today is, when we're in meetings and we're talking things, usually it's the most vocal that you tended to listen to, because the culture, when I first started here, it was the smartest. The smartest person was typically the loudest person. And so, some of the changes that Satya and Kathleen have brought to Microsoft has helped me grow, and helped me grow in listening. And so if someone's quiet, I'll pause and I'll say, hey, what do you think? And bring them in. And so when we talk about, unconscious bias, that is a stem that leads to diversity and inclusion, with the most important thing being the inclusion. And so we all have different backgrounds. We all have things that have affected us. And so our ability to rise above that, to listen, and grow helps us there. And then be vulnerable, be vulnerable. And what I mean by that is, when I screw up, I say it, and I say it to the team. And that was tough for me at first, but I learned that, being vulnerable and acknowledging mistakes has also helped people get closer to me and then provide guidance. So, in every organization I have, there are a few people who I try to surround myself with a diversity of style in people. And what I've learned is, a lot of times they keep me out of trouble, because they tell me when I'm not, when I'm not at my best, or I'm not providing the best possible direction for the team. And you have to be open to that, welcoming to that. And the only way you can go get that type of input and feedback from people is you have to be vulnerable and then listen to what they have to say. So as I talked about those four things, those are the four things for me that have kind of, that have kind of helped me grow in that journey. They're those are the things that I've done when I to get to this point. I am still learning, and so if I were to do this talk, probably a year from now, there'll probably be some things that I'll add, because there'll be mistakes. And so the key theme around being leaders is, fail fast, fail often. But then have the capabilities to recover those failures, learn from those failures, and then provide the ability to go try to help others be better in doing that. And so, as I think we're going to open it up to some questions here, but kind of in closing, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to listen to this knucklehead from born and raised in Chicago, now living in Seattle. But I think what I would love to leave you with before we get to questions is just some key points. The first one is, progress is slow. Some days you'll take 2 steps forward, and then you'll take 2 steps back. That's okay. That's a part of the journey. That's a part of the development that we have to do. And then when you think through this, why is people leadership important? It's important because we have to invest in our people, because they are our greatest assets. Satya Nadella has a quote where he says, listen to your customers and your employees. They are the most important thing, and they define your business. That couldn't be more true. But I would say it's more than just for business. My background is I played baseball in high school and college. That applies to every facet of life. It applies to baseball. It applies to sports. It applies to business. as a father of two, it applies to me raising my boys. And so I started late, right? So I had I'm 51 years old and I have two kids under 3. And the thing that I'm learning from them is I actually have to listen to them. So, my 1-year-old, it's about body language, but he tells me exactly what he wants. And in my 3-year-old, I get down to their level and I talk to them. And because of that, I have a phenomenal relationship with them. And that actually helps me in business, and then be humble, ask for feedback, as a leader, and be open to that feedback. We have a process at Microsoft where we take a employee poll. And, I've had some polls that were fantastic and I've had some polls that were not. Being comfortable with both is what will make us better as a leader. So, when I say be humble, be truly humble, ask for feedback and then take it. The thing I do with that is feedback, I say, is a gift. I take it, I catch it, I look it over, process it. If it makes sense, I bring it into my heart and make it a part of who I am and moving forward. If it doesn't make sense to me, I throw it away, and I appreciate the first person for giving me that feedback, because what it caused me to do is that it caused me to analyze something and then either make tweaks to it or disagree with it. And so thank you for your time today, your valuable time today, folks. And then I'd like to open up to any questions that anyone may have.
All right, Rodney, get ready. We got a few.
Okay.
The first one is mine. So you mentioned earlier that you have to lead from the heart for it to work.
Mm-hmm.
As a leader, what are some examples of you leading from the heart where you came off as genuine rather than simply trying to mask an objective in the message that you gave to somebody?
Let me think about that. So I'll give you 2 examples. And I'm going to leave out names for, so I had a person in my org who, so I work in an environment where you work a lot and you may work all hours of the day or night, just because I have responsibility for a global business. And so one of the things that I did was, and so I would be on all hours of the night. I would send emails at all hours of the night. And what I learned from that is I had a couple of employees who felt that they needed to be on as much as I was on, just because that's the way I worked. And so I had an employee who gave me, one day, it wasn't a breakdown, but it was stress because they were burning out. And I had a skip level with the person, and they were telling me all of that, they were telling me what's going on with them. And so I started working on coaching. And through that, and, asking questions, okay, tell me more, okay, why do you think that? And what I learned in that coaching session with that person was that I was the problem. And I was the problem because I was unintentionally, but I was setting an expectation by how I was working, and people felt that they needed to react and do that. And so I took that. So that was a coaching session with an employee that also turned into a coaching session for me on how I improved. And so I started to go and say, hey, and I started making some changes in our culture. And what I mean by that was in our culture, I said, listen, I in some emails I put, I don't need this today, or I started to try to set expectations for folks, is that you need to work at your own schedule, at your own pace. And it's not about being a task-driven leader, but it has to be about being a results-oriented leader. And so from that lesson, I really started to focus on leader intent. All right. And so I set leader intent in questions, and then I try to make it abundantly clear that you work at your own style, at your own pace. The things that we're going to hold you accountable are these. And then how you go about achieving that is up to you. And so I had to create more clarity because in that scenario, I had no idea that people were looking at my pace and my work schedule and automatically making some assumptions for that, which were a problem. And so that's one example to that question. Another example that I think I have is that I had a person that wanted a promotion, and this person worked very hard. They worked hard, but sometimes they made mistakes, and they made big mistakes and repeatable mistakes. And so in that scenario, I provided some coaching and started working with that person to say, hey, let's slow it down a bit. If you can't, and let's create clarity for people that if you can't achieve it, say that up front. The thing that I learned is that when you are upfront with people, most people are compassionate and they will understand. But when you try to hide it, that becomes a problem. And so I had a person, a woman in Brazil who was phenomenal. She came in Brazil. She was Afro-Brazilian, and she was energetic, right out of school. But she had a little bit of imposter syndrome. She felt she had a chip on her shoulder. And I pulled her aside and I said, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I pushed her, and she didn't like the push at the time, but she changed. And I said, you have to go and connect with people. So it's more than just the what you're going to achieve. It's the how you achieve it. And she changed. And then as a result of her changing, she really took off on a trajectory that was unbelievable. And then not long after that, she became one of Forbes' top 30 under 30 in Brazil, because she learned about the people connection, and she learned about achieving, and she's still driven, achieving those results, but how she did it was key. And it was a proud moment for me when they named her as one of Forbes top 30 under 30, because the impact that she was having, not only to, let's say, our business at Microsoft, or my business at Microsoft, she had an impact on a country at whole. And so the sky is the limit. The thing we have to do is we have to have hire smart, intelligent, compassionate people, both with IQ and EQ, and then get out of their way and let them do their thing. So those are the two examples I wanted to provide, Shervin.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a number of them. How have you seen transformation leadership change at Microsoft under Satya?
Wow. So the thing about that, and so I'm fortunate enough to be here long enough where, I was here and interacted with, all three of our CEOs that Microsoft has had, as well as both of our chairmen. And the thing that is just Satya has brought is Microsoft used to be a culture of know-it-all. And, the smartest person in the room, the strongest opinions, was kind of the way we were. Satya made us a learn-it-all company. And so, and made us curious. And so we had to be more curious with his leadership. And so, at least personally for me, that fit in very well for me, because I think I became not only a better leader. So execution and results has always been the nature of what Microsoft drives us toward, and I fit very well in that. But I think I'm a little bit better now because I've learned a lot about learning and being inquisitive and then listening. And I think Satya brought a lot of that to us.
Great. The next question we have: how do you recover from failing fast when you're leading a team? Even though we know logically it's par for the course, the emotional toll can be hard on our teams.
Well, I think what the thing on that point for me is the first piece is you got to accept failure. You have to accept that when you have a failure, you have to own it. And that's part of that checking your ego at the door. I hate failing. I hate failing. I hate losing. I hate. Um, but you have to, look in the mirror and so that's the first phase. Accept it as a failure. And some failures are bigger than others. I've had my major failures and I've had some that are not so much. But the first piece of that is accepting it, because you're not able to address it until you accept it. And the piece that I've added to the mix there is that I own it. I own it, and I try to own it to my people so that they can see that it's okay to go do that. I think the biggest key that you find in that is when you have failures, most of the time it is because you didn't involve others to kind of help you. Most of the time, not always. But when there's failures, the ability to ask for help and is something that is critical. And so, but in order to ask for help, you have to accept that you failed at something.
The next question is from Scott. He says, active listening. Why is this so hard for vocal leaders? What specific techniques do you use to help you listen better, to lead better?
I am still not great at this. I'm still learning. I'm still, and this is a hard journey for me every day of my life. And so the thing that I have to do is I have to pause. So let me tell you my journey on how I got to this. So, I got training on it, and I tried to work on it. And so what I would do is I would want to respond faster. Like I said, I'm not great at it. I'm still working on it. But so I would try to shut up and say, okay, stop talking, Rodney. Listen to what the person is saying, and then get your point out. And so there are many instances where I would, how do I say this? I would not talk, but I wasn't listening. I was hearing what they were saying, but I was so focused on my next point after they stopped talking to put that point in. And so there's a difference between hearing and listening. And so I think the thing you really got to do is truly listen, give the person an opportunity to say what they have to say and get their point across. Ask open and clarifying questions based on what they're saying, and then weigh in with your thoughts and your feedback. And there's some leaders who are much better at that than I am. I tell you a story about, as I was in a meeting with Satya once, and there was something that I was very passionate about, and a topic, and I was providing and this is Satya Nadella, and so he had an opinion about something. Okay, he had an opinion. He said, and I had a slightly different opinion, and I voiced my opinion. He actually actively listened to what I had to say, and then provided the reason why he felt his viewpoint. For me, that was actually a lesson that I got from that interaction, because he was actively listening and engaged on what I was talking about. And then after he talked about that, he provided his thoughts on that particular subject, as to the why he thinks that the problem we're trying to solve. And it was phenomenal with me. He understood my point. And so that was a lesson for me in looking at active leadership, a leader actively listening to me, and then having a dialogue. I am a firm believer of debate, Scott. And so I like to have debate. There are times when we're in meetings and we're talking about trying to design something. I may take the devil's advocate, even though I agree with what the person is saying. I'll take the devil's advocate to stem out our discussion. Because what I've learned is that, from style, there might be other people who might have that same stance that I took from a devil's advocate, but they may be timid. They may not want to voice that. And so just having dialogue and discussion is critical to come to the best conclusions. And I try to build that into everything that I try to do in the projects, the things we try to land, even how we, sell to customers. There are different ways of doing that, and so having a dialogue around that is key to bring so many thoughts, and then surrounding yourself with, diverse people, and then creating the ability for them to kind of share and create the best possible solution based on that diversity.
The next question is from Eric. He says, "Hi, Rodney. Thank you for sharing your insight. What are some key things you look for when assessing someone's body language? And now that we do a lot of things virtually, has your approach changed in any way?"
No, actually, it hasn't. It's so I don't get, video is very helpful. Like video conferencing is very helpful, and I try to turn on. I always, when I have meetings, more times than not, I try to turn on my video because I want people to see my nonverbals. And there's and so I still look for the same things. I look for things like eye contact, which is a little different on video, because like I'm looking at, I should be looking straight at the camera, but that's weird for me. So I look at my screen to look at some of the pictures to try to create a connection with people, because that's how I communicate better. But the big, I don't think it's a massive change, just because I think the technology is getting better.
The next question we got, Rodney, it says, "What would be your advice or suggestion for someone to lead when they're not in a leadership position?"
Easy. There's a few things that you control. You can, and so I think that focusing on the things that you control and providing and being a leader for those things you control, it starts there. And so there are times as an individual contributor, you control yourself. You control how you react to things. You control the questions that you ask. You control the thinking, and you control the interactions that you have with people. And some of the best leaders are not necessarily the best, are not managers, right? And so every organization, there are people in my org that are a low-level college hire, early in career stage college hires. But those folks demonstrate leadership that is just off the charts. And I create listening mechanisms to hear them. And so as an individual contributor, I think the focus is do your job to the best of your ability, be inquisitive, ask questions, control how you interact, and I believe that, true leaders don't necessarily have to be managers. True leaders have to be, all those things that I talked about, the ego, controlling that, being inquisitive, asking questions, being humble, communicating with conviction, and have the ability to have dialogue with people that's just leadership. And no matter where you are in the reporting structure, that is what's necessary, I think, as leaders, and individual contributors can do that. And now eventually an individual contributor may graduate to become managers and leaders. But some of the best leaders I know are not people managers at all. And some of the people that I listen to the most and want to hear their feedback have no desires in becoming people managers, but they are some very good people leaders that you want in your camp, that you want to surround yourself around, and you want them to provide their opinions on things.
Right. I think that segues into our next question.
Sure.
I guess in different parts of your life, who has been an inspirational leader to you?
Inspirational leader for me. I have many. One of the things I'm kind of like so this is a bad analogy, but I kind of latch on to leaders and try to watch them. So I learn through observation. And so there are many people that along my career journey, just take my career journey at Microsoft, there were many leaders that I encountered, and I took something from all of them, right? If I think about my days when I was in the central region in Chicago, part of financial services, the leader then was a guy. I won't give any names, but the leader guy, he was a phenomenal deal guy. He was phenomenal. He would go and understand what customer points were to shape a deal and shape how we're going to go out and pursue and compete for a deal. He's phenomenal. And I learned that from him. There's another guy when I was in the Eastern United States. He was the leader as well. He taught, I learned from him discipline. And in that discipline of execution and the process, and you follow the process and you execute, you hold people accountable to do what they say. He was phenomenal. And then last but not least, there are many others, but there was also a leader. So I was fortunate enough that a part of my career at Microsoft, there was a retired 3-star general who came and led the US. And this gentleman taught me more than anybody about people leadership. And I mean, he was amazing at it. He was a motivator. He kicked my butt if I didn't do something right. And he was pointed. He taught me about leader intent, and that you have to communicate your intent as a leader, and then surround yourself with capable people who understood that intent, but the recipe of how they got to that intent was theirs, because they're going to experience issues and problems. And so he taught me about kind of the military leadership style, and I adopted that from him. And that was probably it was like he was giving me a PhD in leadership, and I adopted a lot of those thinkings. Thanks to him. And so that he's the one that is that pillar for me that I still look and think about today.
This one is from Janet. She says, "Thank you, Rodney, for the talk. It's always helpful to learn from other leaders' experience. My question is, how do you manage to engage most of the team in any initiative that is important for the organization? Sometimes we struggle to engage the team specifically now that we are working from home."
Yeah, so that's difficult. And I don't necessarily know if I figured that out, and I still make mistakes here all the time. Because there's some things that we work on that are confidential, and I can't necessarily involve the whole team just due to the nature of the thing we're working on. All I can say to you is, regardless of, so if you were in the office and you were in, you would, you'd have coffee with people, maybe lunch. You would, you still working to, you have, what do you call it? By the coffee machine, you have, hallway chats and things like that, which I think made it easier. Even in this virtual world. And so what I do is a lot of times I use Teams, and I'll do virtual coffees with people. Just to try to create that community. One of the things is, my assistant is kind of like I kind of call her my chief. She's my Julie McCoy. For those of us who remember The Love Boat, Julie McCoy was the cruise director who, did all the activities. And so I try to require my assistant to do that, to create opportunities, whether we're virtual or not. And so my assistant used to do virtual game days and things like that. where we'd carve out some time and we'd play games and just to interact with people. And so it is up to us as leaders to create the space for people to connect, to learn from each other, and to work together. And so it has to be intentional. Like I used to be a part of a team where nobody interacted with each other. They just did their work. They were in their offices, and then they kind of went home and did their thing. My learning in Brazil was that I had to go expand that a little more. And so I try to do things to create community for people to get that interaction. And so we do happy hours, and like I have a bunch of college hires on my team and MBAs, but I also have a bunch of late in career stage people who've been doing this forever. And it was so fascinating. One of our kind of happy hours that we had, this was, once things started to settle down from COVID, we had our happy hour. And when they got there, all the college hires sat in their same little area. Then you had all of the, later in career stage people sitting in their area. And so I had one of our college hires, and I pushed her and I said, why did, in one of those skip levels, and I said, why you missed an opportunity, because there are people here who, have been through what, and you didn't necessarily connect with them. And so I think it's got to be intentional. You got to do the hard work, and you have to get it to the point where it's habit. And so we have to create habits, and it's hard at first, but those habits, I think, will solve for that. And then it becomes easier, but at first it's very, very difficult.
Rodney, you mentioned you had some time in baseball as well as having two children. How have experiences in your personal life contributed to your leadership style?
Some of the pieces of my leadership style. So I'm an African-American man from the South side of Chicago. And so there's some of that in me, right? There's a certain raw, I call it a swag. I call it mojo. So there's a certain mojo that I convey just because of where I grew up and where I came from. Some people don't necessarily like that, right? And so I still have to be my genuine self, but you got to create avenues where people can, if they don't, can accept you for you, and you need to accept them for them. I think over my career, sports has been a big part of my career journey and competing. And I think back to my college coach, a guy by the name of Irish O'Reilly, and he was driven. He loved to compete. I wasn't the best, by no means the best player on the team, but I think he would have told you that I was the hardest worker on the team, that I worked hard, and I tried to excel beyond my sheer talent, my God-given natural capabilities and talents. And so I think that experience, from someone like that, is I try to bring that. I try to really work hard. And then I also try to surround myself with people who are better, who I perceive are better than me. Like one key point: for everyone that I have hired, the number one question that I ask is, can I work for this person? Does this person have qualities that I, given reverse, could I work for this person? And so from that background and that experience is, the most I take in is just trying to surround myself with people who are smarter than me, who are better than me, and then being able to, provide guidance to them and then get out of their way. By no means do I think I'm a dumb man, right? At all, but I do really look at trying to focus on bringing, A+ players into my organization. And I'm always recruiting. Always, right? And so, meaning, I may think of some, like for example, I may interact with Shervin. I'm thinking about, okay, if I were to go hire Shervin, what would I have him do? Right. And I'm always thinking, that's the first thing. That's a habit for me that I've formed. So anybody I interact with is this a person that I can report to? And then what capabilities and skills do they have that I think can enhance our team and enhance our ability to compete in the market and have fun while doing it.
Rodney, before I get the next question, I think I already know the answer, but Cubs or Sox?
South Side, brother.
I was thinking, yeah,
White Sox. Now I've changed a little bit since I moved because I haven't lived in Chicago since 2000, and I've changed a little bit. And now I will root for a Chicago team. And so if the Cubs were in the World Series, I would root for them. When I lived in Chicago, no way. I see Scott is a Braves fan, but so I'm a White Sox guy.
What about when the White Sox play the Mariners?
I'm a White Sox guy. And I'm a White Sox guy, a Bears guy, and a Bulls guy. all of those, right?
That's loyalty. The next question is from Daniel. He says, when you fail as a leader, how do you prevent that from negatively impacting your team's trust and respect in your abilities? Is it enough to just be vulnerable? Do you have any examples you can provide?
Own it. You have to own it. And you have to say, I screwed up here. An example that I could provide, I can't provide you the details of it. But there was a scenario when I was looking, so I'm responsible for kind of how we cover accounts and how we build our certain pursuit. Okay. And there was a massive deal that we were working. And in that deal, I literally thought it was column fodder. I thought it was going to be a waste of time. And I said that, like, there's no way you're going to close this deal. Like, you don't have access to power. You don't have sponsorship. What are you, like, you're wasting time. And the person told me, and so then I got even better. And I said, you know what? Fine. You're going to go. This is with one of my directs. And I said, you know what? You're going to go do that. So if you want to go do that, you own it. But I will bet you that you won't land that deal. And there was, and one of the things from the bet was humiliating myself in front of the team wearing a tutu and swimming in this horrible lake that was out front. And they did it. They landed that deal. So I owned it. I owned it. I had to apologize. And then I had to humiliate myself to the team. And the person was gloating. They enjoyed it. It was that plus a very nice dinner. And so you got to own it for that. And you got to make it a healthy situation where people can learn it. They're not gonna own up to their mistakes unless you as a leader do that. And so that was kind of a scenario that I try to live by.
Rodney, we're almost at the end of our hour. Do I have time for one more question?
Of course.
Okay. You mentioned that you served Microsoft in 2 different countries, the US and Brazil. Did you have to adjust your leadership style to relate to the cultural differences these 2 countries have?
Yes, I did. Very much so. Very much so. The US is very pointed. People go and try to get what they need to get done. They don't like a lot of interaction. A lot of the folks don't like a lot of interaction with you. They just want to, I think about leading teams there, that's leading sales teams. And this, there, people wanted to see you, and they wanted to be seen. They wanted to make sure that they had access to you and things like that. So I had to change that style. Globally, because I have a global job, even more so. Like, there are different cultures, and there's some ways I have to communicate in some cultures that, and other ways I have to communicate in other cultures. and I'm still learning that every day. But yeah, there are cultural differences of communication style that are required to get the most out of people. You have to be true to the facts. You have to be true to kind of who I am and how I communicate, but I may soften or strengthen my approach in how I communicate just from some of those life lessons of working in those markets. So I have a responsibility for 92 countries that we operate in. And so the customers are different. The employees are different. And the key differences are not necessarily the technology or the stuff they're trying to do. The key differences are how they relate to one another, how they relate to you, and then how they communicate with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rodney, for sharing people leadership. Improving appreciates your dedication and generosity to the IT community.
Yeah, and I do want to do one shout out. So Lowell, I don't know if Lowell is on or not, but Lowell is one of those leaders I learned from too. And I learned from him how to lead from the front, but also I learned from him how to be compassionate during tough times. And so I will forever be thankful to Lowell, because he helped me and coached me during a time. And so I do want to call that out. And so that, for those of you who are reporting to Lowell, you are very fortunate because he's a phenomenal leader. And he's definitely someone that I look up to.
He's on, and I know he heard you.
Oh, he is on. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's up, brother? Good to see you, man. Well, good for you to hear me.